In the unforgiving streets where the past seems to dictate everyone's fate, Jimmy lived in the shadow of choices that were not his own. Lost between painful memories and the silence of a father who disappeared without a trace, he believed his path was already set. But destiny, like life, always holds the power to surprise. Amidst the pain, a chance for redemption appears when he joins a foundation aimed at rescuing at-risk youth. Alongside Henry, a brother in spirit, and Robert, an unexpected father figure, Jimmy discovers that love, friendship, and hope can heal even the deepest wounds. However, dark secrets from the past threaten to unravel everything they have built together. In the path of redemption, we embark on an intense journey of overcoming adversity, where each character fights to break free from the chains of their past and create a new future. Through tears and reunions, betrayals and forgiveness, Jimmy will learn that sometimes facing the darkness is the only way to find the light, and that true family bonds go far beyond blood. On a cold autumn afternoon, the streets of New York seemed lonelier than ever. Henry, a 12-year-old boy, walked barefoot on the rough asphalt, his face marked by the exhaustion of a hard life. His brown eyes, always alert, searched for any opportunity, anything that could help him survive another day. While rummaging through a trash can, something on the ground caught his attention: a worn, brown leather wallet, still elegant despite its wear. He looked around, no one seemed to notice. He picked up the wallet. When he opened it, his eyes widened. Money. More money than he had ever seen in his life. Maybe, finally, he could escape that difficult life. But something stopped him, a photograph inside the wallet. A man smiling next to a woman and a child. Suddenly, a strange feeling overwhelmed Henry's heart. He knew what it was like to lose something precious. Henry stood in the middle of the street, holding the wallet in his hands, the cold wind biting at his face. The voice of temptation whispered in his mind, "Keep the money, this will change your life." But then a memory. The last time someone extended a helping hand, the lady from the cafe on the corner, who would give him old bread from time to time. What would she say if she knew he had stolen? He closed his eyes and decided, "I will return it." Following the address found inside the wallet, Henry arrived at an elegant building, the kind of place he never thought he could set foot in. The doorman looked him up and down, suspicious. "Can I help you?" the man's cold voice echoed. Henry, with trembling hands, raised the wallet. "I found this." The doorman hesitated, but then, looking at the wallet, he recognized the owner. "Wait here." A few minutes later, a tall, weary-looking man hurried out. His eyes lit up with surprise when he saw the wallet in the boy's hands. "This is mine," he exclaimed, taking it with gratitude. He looked at Henry. The boy clearly wasn't from there. His dirty clothes, his cautious look, something about the gesture deeply touched him. "How can I thank you?" the man asked, still in shock over having recovered something so important. "This was all I had." Henry just shook his head. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Chapter 5. The Surprising Reward. The man, whose name was Robert Thompson, pulled Henry closer. "You are a special boy. Not everyone would have done what you did." And there, in that moment, Robert made a decision that would change not only Henry's life, but his own as well. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I want to help you." Henry, incredulous, blinked. "Help? How?" Robert smiled. A new beginning was about to be offered. In the days that followed, Henry discovered what Robert truly meant by help. He brought him to his house, a huge mansion in the suburbs, a place Henry never dreamed he could live. Every step he took inside the house was followed by a thought. Is this real? Robert and his wife, Karen, welcomed Henry with care. Although he was initially cautious, they soon realized that behind that tough exterior was a scared boy with a good heart. However, not everything was easy. Henry wasn't used to so many good things, or to having a warm bed to sleep in. The first few nights were restless, his thoughts swirling like a storm. What if they change their minds? What if I mess everything up? But every morning, Karen was there, with a gentle smile, and Robert treated him as if he were already part of the family. Despite the new comfort, Henry's past always haunted him. The streets, the hunger, the loneliness. He would look out the window and see children running carefree in the park. He wondered if he could ever truly be like them, free from the shadows of his old world. And then something unexpected happened. One evening, on his way back from school, Henry saw a familiar figure waiting outside the house. His heart raced. It was an old acquaintance from the streets, an older boy named Jimmy. "Henry, thought you could escape, didn't you?" Jimmy's voice was cold, carrying a veiled threat. Henry froze, the old fear returning. Jimmy approached, his predator-like eyes fixed on Henry. "You're living well now, huh? Think you can forget about us?" But before Henry could respond, the door to the house opened. Robert appeared. "Is there a problem here?" Jimmy backed off, throwing one last look at Henry. This isn't over yet. Henry could barely sleep after the encounter with Jimmy. His heart was racing, and old fears invaded his thoughts. Jimmy had always been dangerous. What if he really came back? However, life in Robert's house continued. In the morning, Karen noticed the exhaustion on Henry's face. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked, her voice soft, almost motherly. Henry forced a smile. "Yeah, just had a bad dream." Karen looked at him for a moment longer, as if she knew there was more, but she didn't push. "If you need to talk, I'm here." As the days passed, Henry began to grow closer to Emily, Robert's daughter. She was 14, 2 years older than him, but she never treated him with superiority. In fact, she seemed curious about him. "What was it like living on the streets?" she asked one day while they walked through the garden. Henry hesitated. "Hard. You never know what's going to happen. There's always danger." Emily was silent for a moment before smiling. "Here, you're safe." Henry wanted to believe that, but Jimmy's gaze continued to haunt his thoughts. Living with Robert and Karen felt increasingly natural, but Henry still sensed that something was being hidden. One night, he overheard a conversation in the hallway. The voices were muffled, but clear enough to understand. "Robert, he's in danger," Karen said, worried. "You need to tell him." "Not yet," Robert replied, his voice grave. "It's not time." Henry held his breath. "Tell him what?" A few days later, while Henry was walking home from school, a hand grabbed his arm. Jimmy was there, smiling menacingly. "I warned you, Henry. Think you can escape us? You owe us." Henry tried to pull away, but Jimmy yanked him closer. "Either you find a way to help us, or we'll take you down. And your new family, too." Fear gripped Henry's chest. He knew Jimmy wasn't bluffing. Desperate, Henry returned home with his heart pounding. He knew he had to tell Robert the truth, but something held him back. What if Robert sent him away for bringing danger to his family? When Robert came home that evening, Henry decided to take the risk. "I need to tell you something," he began. But before he could speak, Robert sighed. "I have something to tell you too, Henry." The silence that followed seemed endless. "I grew up on the streets too." Chapter 16, Robert's Truth. Henry was in shock. "You? But how?" Robert sat on the couch, his gaze distant, as if reliving old memories. "Yes, I lived on the streets for years. I did things I regret, but a good man helped me, and I managed to get out. I know what you're going through, Henry." Henry could hardly believe it. The man who seemed to have everything had come from a place as dark as his. "That's why I brought you here," Robert continued, "because I saw in you what I once was. But I need to warn you, the streets don't let you go that easily." That night, Henry could barely sleep. Robert's secret was as shocking as the weight of his own situation with Jimmy. He knew that if he didn't do something, Jimmy would bring danger not just to him, but to everyone he now considered his new family. The next morning, he made a decision. "I need to face Jimmy." Robert, hearing this, tensed. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to that, but if that's what you need to do, I'll be by your side." The meeting was set in a dark alley near Henry's old neighborhood. His heart pounded harder with every step he took. When he arrived, Jimmy was already waiting, flanked by 2 other street kids. "So, you came back," Jimmy mocked, crossing his arms. "I hope you've got something to offer." Henry swallowed hard, but before he could respond, Robert appeared behind him, his presence commanding immediate respect. "He's not giving you anything," Robert declared, his voice firm. Jimmy stepped back for a moment, recognizing Robert. "You're that guy." Robert stepped closer. "I know who you are, Jimmy, and I know what it's like to live like this. But this cycle of violence won't get you anywhere. If you keep going, you'll end up like I almost did, or worse. Jimmy hesitated. Robert's presence clearly intimidated him, but his pride was still there. What do you know about it? You ran away, got rich. Now you think you can save us. Robert looked deeply into Jimmy's eyes. I didn't run away. I fought my way out. And if you want, I can help you, but you need to want it. The silence in the alley was heavy, and then Jimmy finally lowered his eyes. I don't know. The conversation with Jimmy wasn't an instant miracle, but it marked the beginning of a change. Jimmy accepted Robert's help, though still with distrust. The days that followed brought more challenges, but also new opportunities. Henry, on the other hand, started to feel that the past was finally letting him go. He still had scars, but now he had a family, a new chance, and maybe, just maybe, he could help others the way he was helped. The days after the alley confrontation were tense. Jimmy wasn't the type to trust easily, and Henry knew that getting someone off the streets wasn't simple. Robert offered Jimmy a job at his company, starting as a maintenance assistant. At first, Jimmy hesitated. I've never had a real job, he said, suspicious. It's not about where you start, Robert replied calmly. It's about where you want to go. Reluctantly, Jimmy accepted. But Henry could see in his old friend's eyes that he was still torn between wanting to change and fearing failure. Jimmy started working at Robert's company, and for the first few days, things went smoothly. Henry saw him putting in the effort, trying to follow instructions and avoid trouble. However, old habits die hard. One afternoon, Henry found him in a bad mood, glaring at a group of coworkers. These guys think they're better than me, Jimmy muttered angrily. I don't know how long I can take this. Henry tried to calm him down. It'll take time, Jimmy. They don't know what you've been through, but you need to prove you can do it. Jimmy huffed, but deep down, he knew Henry was right. While Jimmy faced his own struggles, Henry and Emily were becoming closer. They studied together, laughed at small things, and shared their secrets. Do you think Jimmy will make it? Emily asked one afternoon as they walked through the park. Henry shrugged. I hope so. He deserves a chance, but the streets can be cruel. It's not easy to leave everything behind. Emily smiled, touching Henry's arm. If anyone can help him, it's you. As much as Henry knew that was true, he also felt the weight of that responsibility. Despite Jimmy's efforts to stay out of trouble, the shadows of his past returned to haunt him. An old acquaintance, Jake, the leader of a small criminal gang, showed up unexpectedly. Jimmy, Jake said, approaching menacingly. I hear you've got a good job now, but you're not going to escape that easily. Jimmy tried to stay calm, but the panic was evident. I'm out, Jake. I'm not going back. Jake laughed. Nobody leaves like that, Jimmy. You owe me. Henry, watching from a distance, saw the confrontation and knew something was about to go wrong. Jake wasn't going to let Jimmy go without a final warning. If you don't do what I want, you'll pay, and so will your friends. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Jimmy, though trying to stay brave, felt the weight of the decision. I'm not going back to that life, Jake. Jake stepped closer, a malicious smile on his face. We'll see how long you can resist. Henry, who had been watching, knew he had to act quickly. He realized that Jake's influence could ruin Jimmy's progress and put everyone at risk. One night, Jimmy came to Henry's house. His face was tense, his body trembling. I don't know what to do, he confessed, his voice breaking. Jake won't stop. He wants to drag me back. Henry listened in silence, trying to process the seriousness of the situation. We have to tell Robert. He can help. Jimmy shook his head quickly. No. If Robert finds out, he'll fire me. I can't lose this chance. Henry sighed. He won't abandon you, Jimmy. Not if you trust him. But Jimmy remained torn between fear and pride. Despite Henry's words, Jimmy still hesitated to tell Robert the truth. So, in a desperate attempt to escape the situation, he made plans to run away. He thought about leaving everything, the job, the new life, even Henry and Emily. In the dead of night, Jimmy packed his things, ready to disappear. However, Henry, who suspected his intentions, went to Jimmy's room. You can't run away again. Jimmy looked at him with sad eyes. I don't want to risk everything, Henry. They'll destroy me if I stay. Henry stepped closer. They'll destroy you if you run. The only way to beat this is to face it. The next day, Henry realized he couldn't wait any longer. He told Robert everything about Jake, the threats, and Jimmy's plan to run. Robert stayed silent for a moment, absorbing the information. "I knew this could happen," Robert finally said. "Jimmy's past was always going to come back, but that doesn't mean he's alone in this." Robert went to Jimmy and had a serious talk with him. "Do you think running will solve anything? I ran for years, Jimmy, and I only found more trouble." Jimmy, emotional, finally opened up. "I just don't want to disappoint you." Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already shown you're stronger than you think. Now let's deal with this together." With Robert now aware of the situation, they decided to take action. Robert, using his contacts in the police, set up a plan to trap Jake. Jimmy would be the bait. The idea was simple. Jimmy would agree to do what Jake wanted, but the police would be waiting, ready to capture him. Jimmy was nervous, but he knew it was the only way to rid himself of Jake for good. On the appointed day, he met Jake in a dark alley, his heart racing. Jake, ever confident, eyed him with disdain. "I knew you'd come back." But before Jake could say more, the police emerged, surrounding the alley. Jake tried to run, but was quickly caught. Jake was arrested, and the threat looming over Jimmy finally disappeared. For the first time, Jimmy felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. He looked at Henry and Robert, knowing that without them, he never would have made it. "You did the right thing, Jimmy," Henry said with a smile. Robert, with a serious expression, added, "Now you have the chance to start fresh, truly." Jimmy nodded, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but now, with friends and a new family by his side, he finally believed he could overcome them. And for the first time in a long time, Jimmy smiled genuinely. With Jake behind bars, Jimmy felt immense relief. However, he knew the internal battle was far from over. The scars of a life on the streets don't disappear overnight. Now, with Jake's threat gone, it was time to focus on something new, his future. Henry and Emily continued offering their support. Jimmy, now more confident, began excelling in his job at Robert's company. Gradually, he adjusted to the routine and found meaning in his responsibilities. "You're doing well," Henry commented once during a lunch break. Jimmy smiled, still a bit shy. "I'm still learning, but it's better than running." Jimmy's words were full of meaning. Running would never be an option again. Though Jimmy was adjusting, the past had its ways of resurfacing. One afternoon, while at work, Jimmy was surprised by an unexpected visitor. His mother, Maggie, worn down by life and marked by years of neglect. She showed up unannounced at Robert's house. Jimmy froze at the sight of her. He hadn't seen her in years, ever since he ran away from the streets. Their relationship was never good. In fact, it was painful. "Jimmy," she murmured, her voice hoarse, her eyes tired. "I need to talk to you." Henry, standing beside Jimmy, noticed his friend's discomfort. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, concerned. Jimmy slowly shook his head. "No, I need to deal with this." Jimmy led Maggie to a more private place. The silence between them was heavy. The words felt distant, as if they both knew the conversation would be difficult. Maggie looked around, clearly impressed by Robert's house. "You made it, finally got off the streets," she said, almost as if blaming him for succeeding without her. "Why are you here, Mom?" Jimmy asked, his voice controlled but filled with pain. She sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I need help. I got nowhere to stay. I thought maybe you could help me." Jimmy's heart tightened. He knew Maggie always came back when she was in trouble, but this time it was different. He wasn't the scared boy running from home anymore. "I don't know if I can trust you," he replied, his voice hard but full of sadness. Maggie looked at him, her eyes welling up. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Jimmy, but you're all I have." After the conversation with his mother, Jimmy felt torn. The anger he held for her was still intense, but there was something else, a sense of responsibility. After all, Maggie was his mother. He remembered the times he wished she had been there for him, but also the times she had abandoned him. He needed advice, so he went to Robert. "I don't know what to do," he confessed to Robert. "She was never really there for me, but now she needs me." Robert listened in silence before replying. "The decision is yours, Jimmy. But remember that helping someone doesn't mean giving up on yourself. Help, but with limits. Protect your own path." Jimmy reflected on Robert's words. He knew Robert was right, but still, the dilemma remained. With Robert's guidance, Jimmy decided to give his mother a chance. He arranged a small apartment for her and helped pay the rent for a while. However, he made it clear that this would be his last time helping if she didn't start taking care of herself. Maggie seemed grateful, but Jimmy kept his emotional distance. He wasn't sure if he could fully trust her. "If you mess this up, Mom, I can't save you again," he said, his voice carrying a coldness he had never shown before. "I won't let you down this time," she replied, but Jimmy, knowing her history, kept his expectations low. While Jimmy dealt with the ghosts of his past, Henry was walking his own path. He had started to excel in school and was also helping Robert with the family business. He and Emily remained close, and their relationship deepened. "Have you thought about the future, Henry?" Emily asked one afternoon as they strolled through the park. Henry paused to think. "I guess I have, but it's strange. I don't know what to expect. I never had many opportunities before I met your dad." Emily smiled. "Now you have all the opportunities in the world. You can be whatever you want." Henry looked at her, feeling grateful for having such a special friend. "I think I'll figure it out." Surprisingly, Maggie began to show signs of improvement. She found a small job as a cleaning assistant and tried to stay away from old habits. Jimmy, though still skeptical, started visiting her occasionally. "You seem different," she remarked one day. More confident, Jimmy simply shrugged. "I've changed. I had to." Maggie looked at her son with a mix of pride and regret. "I wish I had been there for you." The sincerity in her voice surprised Jimmy. Maybe people could change. With Jimmy making progress in his life and Henry focused on his education, Robert had a new idea. He proposed that Jimmy and Henry work together on a project for the foundation he managed. The idea was to help street youth, like Jimmy and Henry once were, find new opportunities. "I think you two can inspire these kids more than anyone else," Robert said. "You've lived what they're living. You know what it's like to fight." Henry was enthusiastic about the idea. "I've always wanted to give back for what you did for me," he said to Robert. Jimmy, however, was more cautious. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted. "I'm still dealing with my own stuff." Robert smiled. "No one is ever 100% ready, Jimmy, but you have a lot to offer." The first meeting with the Foundation's youth was a test for Jimmy. He saw the same distrust in their eyes that he used to carry. When it was time to speak, Jimmy felt the weight of his own insecurities, but seeing Henry by his side gave him courage. "I know what it's like to be where you are now," he began. "I've lived it. I won't tell you it's easy, because it's not. But if I could change, any of you can." Jimmy's words, spoken with sincerity, resonated in the room. In that moment, he realized that maybe he was ready for something bigger. The Foundation's project became a success, and Jimmy and Henry became increasingly involved. Alongside Robert, they began to plan ways to expand the initiative and reach more youths on the streets. But for Jimmy, this journey was about more than just helping others. It was a chance to rediscover himself. He was finally starting to believe that the past didn't have to define his future. One night, sitting next to Henry, Jimmy reflected on everything that had changed. "I never thought I'd be here," he confessed. Henry smiled. "Neither did I, but we are, and we're doing something that matters." Jimmy nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in ages, he had a purpose, and with that purpose came the certainty that he was, at last, on the right path. With the project's success, Jimmy and Henry were more involved than ever in the Foundation. Working with the youth brought a new energy to their lives. Each day was a challenge, but also an opportunity to change lives. Jimmy, now more confident, had become an example for many. He and Henry led talks, workshops, and organized activities to help the youth see there was a way off the streets. "You never imagined this, did you?" Henry asked, watching the youth at one of the Foundation's events. Jimmy smiled, thoughtful. "No, I never imagined. I guess I'm finally doing something that matters." A few days later, Jimmy received an unexpected visit at one of the Foundation's events. His mother, Maggie, showed up. She looked healthier and seemed to want to show Jimmy that she was making progress. "I'm proud of you," Maggie said, emotional. "You've become a man I never thought was possible." Jimmy looked at her with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Despite everything, there was a growing sense of reconciliation. I just wanted to do the right thing, Mom." They hugged for the first time in years, and in that moment, Jimmy felt the weight of his childhood start to lift. As the foundation grew, something about Robert's behavior began to change. He became more reserved and thoughtful, which worried Henry. One day, Henry confronted Robert. "You've been acting differently, Dad. Is everything okay?" Robert hesitated before answering. "There's something I need to tell you, Henry, and Jimmy too. Something I've kept secret for a long time." Henry was confused but felt that whatever was coming would change everything. That night, Robert called Jimmy and Henry for a serious talk. He was visibly nervous. "I have something to confess, something you both need to know." Jimmy and Henry exchanged glances, the tension in the air thick. I knew Jimmy's father. Long before you were born, Jimmy, I was part of the same dark world your father was in. I was involved in illegal things on the streets. Just like him, Jimmy was stunned. "My father? But he disappeared when I was little. What do you know about that?" Robert took a deep breath. "I tried to leave that world, and I succeeded. But your father, Jimmy, he chose to stay. I've always felt guilty about that. And part of the reason I took you in was because of that guilt. I wanted to fix what I couldn't do for him." The revelation devastated Jimmy. He had never known anything about his father, and now he found out Robert had been close to him. "You knew who I was from the beginning?" Jimmy asked, incredulous. Robert nodded, his eyes full of regret. "I saw so much of your father in you, Jimmy. I knew you deserved a chance he never had. I just wanted to help you in a way I couldn't help him." Henry, listening in silence, was as surprised as Jimmy. "Dad, why didn't you tell us before?" Robert sighed. "I was afraid of how you'd react. But now, with everything we've built together, I needed to be honest." Jimmy remained silent for a long time. The anger and pain in his heart were palpable. "So, all this helping me, the foundation, was out of guilt?" Robert tried to move closer. "No, Jimmy. At first, maybe it was, but after that, it was because of who you became. I respect you as a person, and I care about you. Like a son." Jimmy stood up, still shaken. "I need some time." He left the room, leaving Henry and Robert in silence, filled with uncertainties about the future of their relationship. In the days that followed, Jimmy avoided Robert. He needed space to process everything he had learned. The streets, his childhood, his father's absence. Now it all seemed connected in a way he never expected. Jimmy walked through the streets that were once his home, trying to find answers to the questions that haunted him. He remembered Robert's words, but the pain of betrayal consumed him. "He helped me, but why didn't he tell me the truth earlier?" he thought. Chapter 48. The conversation with Henry. Henry decided to talk to Jimmy. "I know it was a shock, but Robert really cares about you." "Jimmy, that's what matters now." Jimmy looked at Henry, his expression bitter. "You don't understand. He hid this from me. He did it out of guilt." Henry shook his head. "Maybe at the start, but look at what you've built together. He believes in you, Jimmy. And so do I. Don't let the past destroy what you have now." Jimmy took a deep breath. He knew Henry was right. Maybe it was time to face his own fears and insecurities and stop running from the truth. Finally, determined, Jimmy went to Robert. They met in the living room, a heavy silence between them. "I've been thinking," Jimmy began. "I can't change what happened. You can't change what happened. But what matters is what you did for me now." Robert looked at him, relieved but still cautious. "I only wanted to give you a chance, Jimmy. I never meant to hurt you with this." Jimmy nodded. "I know, and I forgive you." They hugged, and in that moment, Jimmy felt as though he was closing a painful chapter of his past. Months later, with the relationship between Robert, Jimmy, and Henry stronger than ever, a new revelation emerged. During a foundation research project on life on the streets, Jimmy discovered something shocking. His father, whom he believed was dead, had left clues that he might still be alive. Shaken by the discovery, Jimmy faced a dilemma: search for the father he never knew or move forward with the life he had built. When Robert heard the news, he spoke sincerely. "If you want to search for him, I'll be by your side. But know that, no matter what you decide, I'll always be here for you." Jimmy looked at Robert, moved. "You're the father I never had, Robert. Blood doesn't make someone a father. Love does." With those words, Jimmy made his choice. He decided to move forward with his new life, alongside Robert, Henry, and all who had believed in him. The past would always be a part of who he was, but the future, that was his to build.